Today, let's talk about competitive positioning. Customers, when they investigate options and alternatives, products and services, they're going to look at their options. They're going to look at more than probably just you. So now the question is, if they're going to consider something other than buying from you, who do you want to lead that conversation? You or one of your competitors? Me, I would much rather lead the conversation that says, here's how this compares, A compares to B compares to C. So there's a couple of rules of thumb. First of all, never bring up your competition by name. They have a marketing department. They can do their own promotions. You don't need to be advertising for your competition. So any comments about here's how we compare to AT&T and here's how we compare to Sprint and Verizon is just sends them down the path of literally Googling it after you leave to see if it's true. And just never bring up your competition. They may bring it up to you, and we'll talk about that shortly. The second rule of thumb is don't badmouth your competition. Because if you try to convince the customer, hey, you should buy from us because ABC company is really horrible, that's not really a compelling argument to buy from you. In fact, you should assume the customer is going to go Google it to find out if what you said is true. So once again, you sound defensive and you're sending the customer to further investigate your competition. What I do and what I recommend you do is put your competitors in buckets, if you will, or categories. Bucketize them. And the technique, once again, is subtly poisoning them. We don't want to badmouth anybody. We don't want to sound defensive. But it's very possible that somebody says, well, how does this compare with our other options? I get asked all the time, Tom, how does question-based selling compare with other training programs? And for me to start listing off other training programs and talking about how bad they are, I would never be engaged by a customer or hired to speak at an event. So here's what I do. I say, well, question-based selling is a sales methodology, but out of the universe of sales programs, I solve the problem that traditional sales programs have created. So if you want to go with a traditional approach that was created 30, 40 years ago, you kind of have to wonder, has the sales environment changed in the last 30 or 40 years? So I'd rather teach people on what works today than what may have worked decades ago. I don't have to mention names, but everybody knows they can look at the copyright date of a book and find out if it was written in 1982 or 1979 that it may not be current. So traditional has just that subtlety of poisoning without running the risk of sounding like you're bad-mouthing someone else's work. Another thing, let's suppose it's not sales training. Somebody says, well, what if I went with another manufacturer? Well, you can. And there are other manufacturers. In fact, you have to be careful, Mr. Customer, because I would put it in different categories. Some of the manufacturers in the business are the everything for everyone crowd. We do everything for everybody. And I would tell you, if you hear that from a vendor, you should run the other way. No one does everything for everybody well. And so as soon as somebody claims that just can't be true. It never is true. So we do everything for everybody. We don't. We do what we do really well. But if you want everything from everybody, I don't think you'll ever find that. You also have the Me Too for Less crowd. Somebody shows up, oh, we do that too. We do it for less money. We can help you. Well, what you find is the cheapest of anything is rarely the most cost effective. So maybe they can undercut you price-wise and then cut corners later on. But the Me Too for Less crowd is another crowd you should be afraid of. And then you got the piece parts vendors. We could take this piece from vendor A and this piece from vendor B and then put this piece from vendor C and somehow duct tape it together into a complete solution. And yes, there are things that need to work together, but if we're comparing a complete solution against a piece, parts, duct tape together thing, you have to wonder how many support issues are going to come up down the road or how much finger pointing comes up when something doesn't work right. So you have categories you can put your competitors in. I'll give you another example. I trained a consulting firm, and they said, well, Tom, we're not the largest consulting firm in the world. I said, okay, well, if you're going to compete against it, and they bring them up, they said, well, How do you guys compare with KPMG? Well, KPMG does a lot of things for a lot of people. And they're a huge firm, and they have a wide range of practices. And if you need a wide range of practices and you need everything they do, then maybe they're the right choice. Our specific focus is what you're trying to accomplish in terms of, pick something, regulatory operations and financial transactions with world trade. That's our specific focus. So we don't have all the extra overhead that you have to pay for having such a huge practice with practice areas you don't need. On the opposite, if you happen to sell for KPMG or a large firm, you say, well, if you want to go with a boutique firm that has limited resources, then maybe that's a better choice. As soon as the conversation goes beyond the scope of our resources, we have tons of resources to bring into bear. And yes, we have a large company, but you only pay for what you use. So we have the resources that a lot of companies don't. So there's plenty of opportunities to put your competitors in buckets. That's a traditional approach. If you want that, if you want to do it the old way, that's fine. That's a piece parts approach. And if duct taping piece parts together works, that's fine. If you want to go somebody with a me too for less, who's going to cut quarters, that's another option. I completely understand. We see this every day. Mr. Customer, we get asked these questions every day. We just have solved the problems that traditional solutions have created. That's what I would recommend, is instead of trying to dodge the conversation about your competition, you might want to be the one to characterize how your product and service compares with something else that might belong in one of those other buckets. It can create a huge advantage in terms of making the decision, because then they say, well, why bother doing a lot of investigating? I kind of have a sense of how you're very different than everyone else. Try it.